In order to survive in a harsh, post-apocalyptic world, Katya, a relentless survivor, grows mushrooms for sustenance. They may be the wrong kind of mushrooms, or maybe the right kind. Sleepawake is a thoughtful and meditative journey through a ruined world where sleep kills and all attempts to prevent that have failed. The world declines slowly, only Big Pharma remains to peddle drugs with diminishing effects to those that survive. It's like if the world was only populated by insomniacs and the only places left in business were coffee shops. It's a trippy thing with a semi-unreliable narrator, if only because she's half awake the entire game.
Stop drifting off, Katya.
It's Katya's story, one of grief and loss, as she's the last of her family that hasn't been taken by the hush, the aforementioned pandemic where when you sleep, there's a chance that you just disappear, leaving only a burned out silhouette of your last few restless moments on Earth. Now, it's not guaranteed that you vanish when you sleep, but whatever the hush is, happens frequently enough that the tethers of functional society orbit completely around it. People do everything in their power to remain awake, some with drugs, some with physical pain, anything to stave off that good night. The draw of this game is the world building, which is pretty fantastic. It's a hopeless world racked with natural-ish disasters seemingly no one should have survived. The story digs into this. What are these forces that wiped out humanity? What do you do in the face of oblivion when it could come overnight, any night? When your entire family is gone and you're the only one left, why do you continue? There is some light gameplay here, emphasis on light, but it's enough to keep Katya awake, or mostly.
Ah, shit. Drifting again. How long have I been walking?
It may put you to sleep though, as enemies that you do encounter display about as much intelligence as someone who's been awake and high on sketchy narcotics for years. Gameplay is never the draw with games like these, right? It's the story, the world building, the art, of which there is plenty. Playing Sleep Awake is like living in that half dream state where you get ripped awake right as the dream gets going. If a trippy psychological horror adjacent thing like this sounds good to you, take some eye drops and check it out. You could categorize this as a walking sim, and you would not be wrong. And oddly enough, I like this game the most when it fits that bill. It's really when it tries to toss in a couple light mechanics that it really begins to drag. Katya is an alchemist who lives alone in the ruins of a place called the Crush, what's left of an otherwise unnamed city. Most of the game sees you sneaking through ruined streets and picking your way across collapsed buildings. These are my favorite parts, with plenty of bespoke world building and environmental touches that show you how people carry on despite never knowing when they will never wake up again. Missing posters serve as grave markers for children taken in their sleep by the hush. Survivors graft crude hovels to leaning skyscrapers trying to carve out some existence despite it all. Propaganda from the cruel DTM enforces strict curfews, even facing the same plague that the citizens face, policing the populace to maintain the illusion of control remains. When you're sneaking through these places, taking in this world, I loved this game. Seeing a world die with a whimper, no nukes, no guns, no alien invasions, just entropy and attrition. It's bleak, and it kind of reminds me of something like the Southern Reach trilogy of books, or the cruel pointlessness of something like I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. Much of this world building is scored really well too, with lots of dark synths and bouncing dreamlike droning, but then during some of the live action pieces it'll explode into something more frenetic and driving. The soundtrack really helps dig in the tone. Katya will come across microfilms that peel back layers of society, highlighting some of the major factions that you encounter in the game, and you can find and examine objects in the environment for additional details, you know the stuff. A couple times you'll need to sneak by some enemies or perform some small environmental puzzle. It's not good, and I don't really know if you could call this gameplay. I mean, it is, but you could say that selecting your game from the menu is also gameplay, but like it's not. It's there because it has to be. These guys must be stiff at the knees from the lack of sleep because they can't look under a table or climb a ladder. Or duck through a doorway. It's pretty bad. It's as bare bones as you can get and still call it stealth. They don't appear to patrol in a set path, as they sometimes get tied up on one another. Maybe they're sleepwalking. If they were sleepwalking, that would explain why they immediately forget about you when you climb under this table. Luckily, there are only like 2 of these segments in the entire game, and I feel like they're mostly here to establish the DTM as bad guys, even if they don't really come into focus in the story. There is a slightly better iteration of this towards the end of the game, which comes with that don't look at them thing while you're sneaking past. But that's about it in terms of gameplay. These segments really bring it down, man. You get 2 whacks on the head before you die, which at least gives you a chance to look at this cool restart screen, but it loses its luster fast. You're better off just blasting through these areas. There's nothing here to engage with, so as long as you don't get caught up on something, you can just run right past these dudes. Outside of that, you may have to move a box around or input a code, which are slightly better than the stealth, but still light enough and sparse enough to really kind of feel like they just get in the way of the good stuff, which is the exploration and the story. With games like these, I just kind of want to sink into the environments. I want to get into the worn out shoes of our hero and get to feel what it's like to survive in a world so hostile as this. And there's an initial puzzle where you need to whip up a batch of your homemade stimulant or whatever. And I was like, hell yeah, more of this, please. But you don't really get any more of that. A plus side is that you don't really stay still for too long. You're always herded through to the next area, which offers a pretty nice pace to the game, even if maybe the story struggles to keep up sometimes. And speaking of story, this is the story block, so good segue, man. I'm gonna get into some spoilers for the story here. I'm not gonna be exhaustive, so I won't get into the ending or finale, but I'll talk about characters and concepts and levels up to that point, okay? Also, hey, if you made it this far, maybe give some thought to hitting that thumb thing and the sub button. It really does help me a lot, okay? Thanks, that's it. Okay, yeah, so the story. I like this, and I like it a lot. I think for the most part, it does a pretty good job of doling out the world building, though when I think of the story, I like it more for the world building and less the story itself, what Koch is actually trying to do. Like I said, you'll find microfilms and she'll offer some small observations on the world around her, or some memories from guidance of her dead dad, who will more or less directly tell you what's going on, but it's written well enough to not feel overbearing. The world here is really neat, and it's definitely not a place I'd like to live. The remnants of humanity live in a place called the Crush after being gobsmacked by the twin disasters of the Swell and the Hush. Yeah, there's lots of proper nouns in this game. The Swell was a nice evening of acid rain that melted, eroded, and crumbled much of civilized society. Somewhere along this timeline, the Hush came along as well, as I mentioned earlier, a psychological plague that eats you up out of existence when you fall asleep. The world kind of tries to continue along. Despite this, society crumbles and splinter groups come up, one of which is called the Pain Eaters, who I love. They stay awake through small but constant applications of physical pain. You can't fall asleep if you're laying on a bed of nails, right? Rather than splash some cold water on their face, they hang themselves from the ceiling. I think they're neat. As a world building tool, it's great because it not only shows us the severity of this plague, how desperate people are and fearful of that inevitable end, but it also shows the societal failure to address it. You'll find propaganda from the DTM and advertisements for their Delta theaters, a sketchy as hell place where you can go to sleep without really sleeping, thus avoiding the risk of non-existence, though clearly they don't really work. Clearly people are hanging themselves from the ceiling in order to stay awake. You'll find some documents stating the efficacy of these treatments go down over time, so even this isn't strong enough to stave off the Hush. Then there's the electric guys who, similar to the Pain Eaters, have found a way to circumvent the need for sleep. They rig up these freaked out electrical currents and rip neighborhoods out of their electricity and kind of zap themselves to sleep, allowing them to rest, but again, without triggering whatever part of the sleep cycle puts you at risk. Neither of these factions have much to do with the story and really only make about one appearance each, which is a bummer. These guys are so cool. Katya's methodology for staying awake is just tripping balls all day long. She comes from a family of alchemists, and her father was one of the head honchos who came up with the initial wakefulness drug that was pushed to the market. You'll go to their offices later in the game, and outside of their doors they have these twin lion statues, but they're sleeping. I love that. Nice touch. But whatever drugs he helped came up with wasn't enough for him or baby brother Bo, both of whom are gone by the time the game starts. I like the story best here when it's Katja struggling to survive on her own, when she's going through the motions her dad taught her before he vanished, when she's struggling and failing to repair a plumbing issue that probably just would have been avoided if she still had her parents around. She's just a kid, and while she has the grit to survive, it's mistakes like that that remind you that she's really alone. She's trying to keep up with everything, trying to remember her father's teaching and carrying on because what other choice does she have? I find this a pretty compelling hook, and it lays the groundwork for a slow story of grief and loss, persistence and acceptance, but it only kind of goes that way. The pacing is kind of weird. It's a short game, maybe 3-4 hours, and because of that, before too long, you're investigating the true nature of the hush and coming into some pretty big revelations as to the nature of the world and the forces that are stamping it out. I feel like it's missing the middle of the game, and it kind of jumps straight to the part where you find out that, your dad is alive, and whoever has been grabbed by the hush might not be dead at all. Katja, for her part, is not too bothered by this.
Dad was trying to recreate that sound.
They could have easily filled this game with more time among the factions and the ruins of civilization, more time investigating whatever her father was getting up to before he was taken, more time grieving the vanishing of her baby brother, more time questioning reality and bleeding into and out of that ever-present and super dangerous threat of sleep. By the end of the game, it seems to set us up for a sequel, which feels a little ahead of itself. Still, all in all, there's a lot to like about the story and the world here, and I think if you have an eye for interesting world building, you'll find some value. A sick soundtrack and endlessly trippy and creative visuals go a long way for a game of this scale, and I think Sleepawake nails it in that aspect. It retails at $30 USD, which is just on the steep end. Presentation-wise, it certainly has a high dollar value attached, but the gameplay is so light and the actual mechanics of what you're doing are just not good. If you're on the fence at all, it feels a little too high for me to recommend, but if you're looking for something moody and evocative with great visuals and an interesting premise, then you'll be happy. Otherwise, maybe sleep on this one.